Hello and welcome to the garden. Well, it's a pretty scorching day today and this little corner here is a bit of a sun trap, so I don't want to hang around here too long. But what I'm doing is just potting on a bit of mint. Now, of all the plants in the garden, this one is the most precious to me. In all likelihood, it is just an ordinary mint. I'm not sure about that though, because it is particularly delicious. But this is the only plant that I can't replace. This old mint has been growing in my nan's garden for, well, as long as I can remember. Now, I don't know if there's any still in her garden because she hasn't been with us for, well, more than a couple of decades now. But before she passed away, my dad rescued some of the mint and planted it in his garden, where it also ran quite wild. So for very many years, I haven't bothered to grow much mint because it was so easy just to pinch a bit from my nan's garden or then later from my dad's garden. But unfortunately, my dad has also left us. So I asked my mum if she could find any trace of the mint in their garden, and she came up with 3 straggly bits of runner. My mum was always digging it out. She didn't like the way it ran wild, and of course, if you don't want it to run wild, you've really got to put it in a pot because it can become very invasive, and some varieties more than others, and this one is a particularly vigorous sort. So she'd removed most of it, but managed to find these 3 lengths of runner. And well, one of them I had in this pot. I've already moved that onto here. And then I had a couple of bits that I just set out in these trays. There wasn't much to them, but they were long flat bits of root. So I laid this out in the tray, and sure enough, we've got a lot of vertical shoots have developed from that. But along with those vertical shoots, we've got this stem here, and this is sort of running along the ground a bit. It's got these vertical shoots at nodes along the stem, and if I bury this an inch or 2 in the soil, then almost certainly roots will develop at each one of these nodes, and we're going to end up with a great big plant. So that is what I'm doing here. I've done 2 other tubs. So the first thing is I want to just break this out of here and see what state the roots are in. Wow, you can see this vicious root here. This is the sort of root that is spreading. And then we've got all this fine root, which we don't really need all of that. And I think to get this in here, I'm going to be a little bit vicious and tear off some of this root. It really won't mind this root pruning. It's not going to set it back or anything, and that way I'm going to make room for that stem to be layered into the pot. So right, so that would fit fine. I'm going to just cut the end of that off there, I think, and that's going to fit great. So a bit more soil. I'm going to just tease a few of these roots out. This will soon run through this pot. I wouldn't normally have set this out in a tray, but it was the only thing I had to hand at the time. And it didn't take long before it got established in there. Right. So that's not bad. And now I can lay this stem down and I will cover that with, well, maybe 2 inches of soil, and that is then going to produce some new plants. Now I'm going to have to pot these up every year, I would have thought, in order to keep this going, because I might actually get a peg for that. So to help keep that down for now, I'll just push that peg down through. Yeah, that's good. So I will probably have to pot these up each year, maybe split them and put them into new compost, because they will so quickly get bound up in these pots. It doesn't matter what size pot you put it in, it won't be long before it is a solid mass of root in there, and then it just won't perform very well. Now it's a little bit scruffy looking at the moment and doesn't really enjoy this really hot, dry weather, but I'll give this a good soak and I think this is going to do fine. Oh wow, I hadn't noticed, but there's a little ladybird larva on there, so I will leave that one alone. I don't know how it's managed to hang on to that leaf while I've been rummaging around here, but it must have a good grip, and I think it won't be too long before this is a mass of growth. Anyway, with 3 pots saved here, I think there's every chance of keeping Nan's mint going for a few decades more. Well, next I've got a few spare basil plants, and rather than waste them, I thought I would pop them into these nice little pots here. They probably won't all fit in, but I'll see how many I can get in there, and I'll leave these somewhere warm to grow on. Right, I've firmed down the bottom of the soil, but I'll just leave that there fairly loose so I can get some plants in. Now these have been in these cells for perhaps a little bit longer than is ideal. Well, yes, a lot longer than is ideal. But I'm sure they'll do okay in here once they get into some fresh soil. I mean, they look fine. I'll pack these in fairly close. I've got them well spaced in the greenhouses and the polytunnel, but in these little pots I'll probably put them in fairly dense. At least 4 of these plugs, and there's 3 or 4 stems in each one. I'm just making a hole and packing them in. Oh, that's got a lot of root. I'll tease a little bit of that out. Yeah. Now, can I fit one in the middle? Actually, I don't think so. I think that is probably plenty. So I'll firm those in. Pack around with a little bit more compost. Again, just pack the soil around them, and now these were good to go a week or 2 back, but I had plenty in the greenhouses and polytunnel already, so yeah, these were some spares. My first sowing didn't go quite so well, but these plants look really quite nice. Yeah, so These are going to do fine in here. What I would do, well, after they've settled down and got a bit of root in, I will come through and pinch these out roughly here, and that's then going to help them to bush out. We'll get new shoots from the leaf axils here. There are already these small shoots, but when I've pinched out this top growth, these will then develop quite strongly, and we'll end up with lots more basil in these pots. I always check the temperature of the water when I put the hose on, because where it's sat in the sun, it can get really hot in there, and I don't want to water the plants with very hot water. Next on my list are these little pots of chives, and then my last sowing of spring onions. So these were sown some weeks ago, and they've just been in these little pots. I've got, I think, ordinary chives and garlic chives, and of course these are perennials, so I want to set these out somewhere I'm quite happy for them to come back year after year. Now, I didn't sow these too densely because they will multiply and I can divide them up later. Now, I'm trying not to get these confused, although I might have done so. It's not a big deal. I think these are the garlic chives. I only put a label in one pot, and that relied on me then keeping them all in good order, but I'm not entirely convinced I've done that. And I think I've got, well, I've got lots of pots here. So yeah, I think that will do. I'll keep those two as spares. So this area had our second batch of rocket plants, and they've gone to seed. So we've just removed those and given it a quick rake. I won't be sowing any more rocket now until later in the year because it doesn't like the warm conditions. It'll do much better in the cooler parts of the year. And probably less likely to be bothered by flea beetle, though we kept it under mesh for that reason. Well, these are very wispy looking plants at the moment, but they will do better when they get their roots down into some proper soil, I think. They could have stayed in these pots for a bit longer, but I think I'd rather get them established sooner rather than later. And there's much less danger of them accidentally drying out in the bed here than there is in the pots. As ever, the soil in this border is a little bit stony. More than a little bit. The chives aren't too bothered about the soil conditions, really. They should be happy enough in here. It's fertile enough, it's just full of stone. So these spring onions are white Lisbon. This is my last sowing of these. I could make further sowings of spring onions, of course, but I'm probably not going to. Perhaps I'll make some towards the end of the season and perhaps put some under cover, but I don't really need more spring onions now. I've still got a ton of them to harvest from the last batch, and these will then follow on, and then I've got a mountain of shallots to come, so I really don't need too many more. So I've just sown these all together in pots, and see, these grow quite well this way. I'm quite happy with this method. I'm setting them just a little bit deeper in their planting holes. Get rid of the boulders. Oh crikey, I don't want that in there. Now you might notice on these that I came through and gave these a bit of a haircut recently, and that's because they were all long and wispy and flopping around. And it's a good idea to do that if your onion seedlings are flopping over, because they respond quite nicely to a little haircut. It encourages the development of new leaves, and that in turn will strengthen the plant and it won't be flopping over anymore. Well, we've had rain not too long ago, so there is some moisture in this soil. It's not quite as dry as the surface might suggest. On the other hand, I still want to water these in because I want to make sure that the soil is nicely settled around the roots. And I think giving them a good soaking does help them establish after being transplanted. Well, that's the herbs dealt with for now. I will probably do a second sowing of parsley later in the year, but the first sowing is just going mad now. So we've got tons of parsley, and the basil in the tunnel and the greenhouses is growing away nicely. So should have plenty of herbs for the summer. Anyway, that is all for this video. So thanks ever so much for watching, and bye for now.